For this lecture, we are going to discuss hormones and sex. So first we start off with the endocrine system, okay? Hormones are chemicals secreted by a cell group that travel through the bloodstream to act on target tissues. Endocrine glands release hormones within the body, and exocrine glands use ducts to secrete fluid outside the body, such as tears and sweat. So let's look at this a little bit more detail using the graphic. Major endocrine structures, let's start at the top. Hypothalamus, control of hormone secretions. The hypothalamus is really the cortical mastermind behind all the hormones because it tells the pituitary gland what to do. Then you have the pineal gland, reproductive maturation, body rhythms. Pituitary gland, that's broken up into anterior and posterior pituitary. We'll talk a lot about those in future slides here. Thyroid, growth and development, metabolic rate. Adrenal glands, we have the adrenal cortex, salt and carbohydrate metabolism, inflammatory reactions as well. Adrenal medulla, emotional arousal. We have the pancreas, sugar metabolism, building, creating that insulin, the gut, digestive and appetite control, and then the gonads, okay? Body development, maintenance of reproductive organs in adults. Okay, so mechanisms of hormone action. We start over on the left-hand side, we're going to start off with the peptides, okay? Peptide hormones are short strings of amino acids, okay? There are also some that are amine hormones, and they're modified version of a single amino acid, also called monoamine hormones. Okay? These peptides and amine hormones bind to specific receptors on the surface of a cell and activate chemical signals or second messengers inside the cell. So that's what's being shown to you on the left-hand side there, these peptide hormone actions. Either the peptide hormones or the amine hormones act in this way where they fit into a receptor site and then open up a cell. They activate then a second messenger, and that's how they operate. Okay. Now, steroid hormones, you'll see on the right-hand side, are derived from cholesterol, and they work a little bit differently. Okay. Steroid hormones cross the cell membrane and bind to receptors inside the cell. So though not in that bilipid layer, okay, but inside the cell. The steroid receptor complex binds to specific regions of DNA and then controls the expression of specific genes. So we're seeing it entering into the nucleus here and then affecting the genetic makeup of those cells. Almost all hormones act on more than one target organ. These are just kind of some general notes for hormone action, okay? A hormone may have different effects on each target and act to coordinate different parts of the body. One hormone may cause a response at more than one type of receptor, and one target organ may respond to several hormones. And this is especially true in the brain. Okay, the pituitary gland. So the pituitary stalk connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. Like I mentioned, the hypothalamus is the control unit here, telling the pituitary gland which hormones and so on to release. Given direction from the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland releases important hormones via neuroendocrine cells. And you see in the graphic below, you see that neuroendocrine cell, which are specialized neurons, but they release hormones into the blood. So they don't connect, they don't communicate to another neuron, but they actually release hormones into the blood. Okay, so let's talk about the pituitary gland. We'll start off with the posterior pituitary gland, which releases two hormones into the bloodstream. Those are oxytocin and arginine vasopressin, or adenine. Okay? Produced in neuroendocrine cells, we just saw those, okay, in the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. When an action potential in these neuroendocrine cells reaches its terminal, the hormone is released directly into capillaries in the posterior pituitary, okay? So in the graphic you see there You have the hypothalamus on top. You see the paraventricular nucleus. You see the supraoptic nucleus, the pituitary stalk, and then those ingredients, right? Those hormones, oxytocin and so on, being released directly into the capillaries and out of the pituitary gland. And this is going to be the posterior pituitary gland. Okay. Effects of posterior pituitary hormones. So for oxytocin, it's involved in reproductive and parenting behavior and uterine contractions. And the AVP promotes water conservation and increases blood pressure. Okay, so what does the anterior pituitary? A lot of times they call the pituitary gland the master gland, right? And even in more detail, sometimes they'll say the anterior pituitary is the master gland because it releases so many of these hormones, okay? The anterior pituitary gland contains endocrine cells, okay, again, that synthesize and secrete many different tropic hormones. And what that means is that these hormones, tropic hormones, are those that affect the secretions of other endocrine glands. So only target glands have the appropriate receptors for tropic hormones. And the hypothalamus regulates the release of tropic hormones from the anterior pituitary using releasing hormones. So again, you see the on the right-hand side here, the anterior pituitary gland and the release of tropic hormones. And there's a whole list here of prolactin, gonadotropic hormones, thyroid stimulating hormones, ACTH, which creates cortisol, and growth hormone. Okay, so that's why many people talk about the anterior pituitary as really the master gland because it's sending out all these hormones that act on in other areas of the body, like the adrenal glands and so on. Okay, hormone secretion is controlled by the brain in response to internal and external cues, and we know that to be the hypothalamus. Hormone release from neuroendocrine cells is regulated by a feedback system. The graphic that I gave you there shows the negative feedback, which is output feeds back and inhibits signals for further secretion. So again, hypothalamus, right, to the endocrine cells, to those target cells, and the target cells might even be in the adrenal glands or the gonads or anything like that, okay? And then you have a biological response, which feeds back to the hypothalamus to help regulate either increase or decrease the amount of hormone being released, again, from the pituitary gland. Okay, so let's look at specifically some of those target areas for the hormone release. The hypothalamus controls gonadal hormone production by releasing gonadotropin releasing hormone into the median eminence. GnRH, this gonadotropin, stimulates the anterior pituitary to release one or both gonadotropins. This is all showed to you again in the graph here. So again, hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary. Remember, these are the ones, tropic hormones. So it's the anterior pituitary. And then causing release of the gonadotropins. Specifically, we have follicle stimulating hormone, which stimulates the production of sperm. And we have luteinizing hormone, which stimulates production of testosterone. Okay? And then the testes produce and secrete an androgen called testosterone. So you'll see that in the graph. Again, it's also showing you that negative feedback loop that goes back up to the hypothalamus to regulate, again, in this case, how much GnRH for the anterior pituitary to release. So that is a good picture of the gonadal steroid hormones for a male. And now let's look at the gonadal steroid hormones for females. Okay, so here the hypothalamus controls gonadal hormone production by releasing again the GnRH into the median eminence. GnRH stimulates the anterior pituitary to release one or both gonadotropins. So again, if you look at the chart, same thing here. Hypothalamus release GnRH, anterior pituitary tells that to release the gonadotropins. Again, we have the follicle stimulating hormone, FASH. In this case, though, it's stimulating ovarian follicles to grow. Okay. And then you have the luteinizing hormone again. In this case, stimulates the follicles to form. Okay. And then the target organs here with the ovaries produce and secrete estrogen and progesterone. Okay. And you have down there target cells, estrogen, development and maintenance of female reproductive organs, secondary sex characteristics, and then progesterone, wall of uterus for implantation, and breast for milk secretion. Okay. And I just want to add to this that oral contraceptives contain small amounts of synthetic hormones, which exert negative feedback on the hypothalamus. Okay, so that's the way that they are working. They put these synthetic hormones into the system to activate this negative feedback system that you see in the graphic there, okay, which in this case inhibits the amount of GnRH released and sent out from the hypothalamus. Okay, now how does the sensory systems initiate, or how do they mesh with our hormonal system? Okay, so sensory input and experience affects levels of circulating hormones, which can affect future behavior and future experience. So if you look at the graphic here, we're seeing a male pigeon looking at a female pigeon. Okay, so the sensory organ here is the eye. The physical energy is that female pigeon coming into the sensory organ of the eye, and that's feeding back into the system. Okay, it goes to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus then releases the GnRH. Okay, pituitary gland is activated. Pituitary gland releases the gonadotropins to the sexual organs, the targets, in this case testes, and the testes then produce testosterone. So this is the process for how neurons or the process of neural regulation in the release of hormones. Okay. And then the stages of reproductive behavior. Okay, sexual attraction brings males and females together. They may be synchronized with physiological readiness to reproduce, indicated by odors reflecting estrogen levels in females. Then it moves to the appetitive behaviors, which they establish, maintain, or promote sexual interaction. A proceptive female may approach males or perform ear wiggling. Male behaviors include staying near the female, sniffing, singing, and nest building. The reason why they're focused on singing and nest building is because they're using the analogy in the graph to the left, where we're looking at a peacock. Okay. Copulation involves one or more intromissions in which the male penis is inserted into the female vagina. Following stimulation, the male ejaculates sperm-bearing semen into the female. If a female is willing to copulate, she is sexually receptive or in estrus. Okay. And then finally, at the bottom here, post-copulatory behavior varies across species. Post-copulatory behavior may include parental behaviors to nurture the offspring. Okay, I know this is kind of a busy slide here for you, but I wanted to show you some of the brain areas for reproduction. We'll focus just a little bit on the left graphic for the rat model, and then we'll focus more time on the right graphic for the human model. Okay, but so let's say we take up at the top there, you have for the male rat. Okay, the male rat starts with higher brain centers. Okay, then moves to the amygdala, then it moves to the midbrain, to the brainstem, and then to the spinal cord for the actual movement of sexual reproduction. Okay, we also see that these higher brain areas, you see the basal ganglia is involved. The basal ganglia is a big motor area, so that provides him the ability to perform these actions, these motor movements. Okay. You will also notice the vomeronasal organ is involved here, and that going to the amygdala. Remember, that organ lied parallel to the olfactory bulb. Okay, it picks up on pheromones. Okay, at the bottom, the female higher brain centers again, going to the hypothalamus, to the paraqueductal gray, to reticular formation, and then to spinal cord. Okay, and this is promoting lordosis, or the body positioning for acceptance of that male partner. Okay, so that is in a rat model. If we see the human model on the right side, we see the cortex is involved. So just like the rats, right, higher brain centers, the cortex mediates the most complex aspects of sexual experience. But then you see the ventral striatum involved, associated with the anticipation and experience of sexual activity and other pleasurable activities. Then the hypothalamus becomes involved. The ventral medial nucleus plays a role in female sexual behavior. The medial preoptic area plays a role in male sexual behavior. Okay? And then that hypothalamus regulates the pituitary gland, all the stuff that we just talked about earlier. Also, the amygdala, right, plays a role in the identification of potential mating partners. Okay, emotional components and cognitive factors do play a strong role in women's sex lives. Emotional intimacy and desire, more than physical arousal, are crucial in initiation of sexual responses. And following an encounter, emotional and physical satisfaction are both important. Basic sex drive seems to be greater in men. Testosterone must be in circulation to activate typical mating behavior in men. And a low dose of androgens can restore sexual interest and activity in men and women. Okay. So let's look at sexual differentiation, right, from the very beginning. Okay, a single steroid signal, an androgen, right, masculizes the body, the brain, and behavior. So you look at the top, genetic sex, XY, with the testes. If testosterone is there, then the sex is going to be a male. Okay? If you're looking at if there's no testosterone there, then the formation is going to be a female. So if the nervous system does not receive an androgen signal, the body will organize itself as a female. If rats are exposed to androgens early in life, they behave as males. If not, they behave as females. Now, I wanted to bring this up also. There's a lot of studies and research going into the brains, the brain areas of homosexual individuals. And so I want to bring up one study. LeVay examined the INAH3 nucleus of the preoptic area of the hypothalamus. He noticed that the nucleus was larger in men than in women, and larger in heterosexual men than in homosexual men. So there is no cause and effect as of this time in here. It's just simply something that they're being looked at, but it is not clear if the size difference is a result or a cause. So at this point, we are not saying that because this area of the hypothalamus is different in homosexuals versus heterosexuals, that is causing the difference in their sexual preference. But it is something that to continue studying. And then the last thing that I wanted to go over here was the psychosocial dwarfism. Okay, so the brain does not produce the releasing hormones that stimulate GH, growth hormone secretion, and therefore growth is stunted. So what we're looking at here is that there's possibly young kids, okay, that are being mistreated. They are not being fed like they should be fed. It's severe neglect. Okay, and so you'll see that average height. That's kind of like that best fit line from lower left to top right. Okay, most of these lines, they start below that line and they stay below that line, except for the orange one there. Okay, I know now I don't have a legend to show you what each one of those mean, but what I'm looking at here is that these are individuals that, again, were probably malnourished for a long period of time. Okay, it could have been also emotional contents and lots of psychological harm and things like that as well. Okay, but they're moving along. They're underweight, and then you see the little asterisk marks. Okay, those asterisk marks are when there's a removal from a situation. So that removal from the situation can restore growth, but just like I said on here, you're noticing that very rarely do they go above average height, okay, except for that orange one there. So if we look at the green one, from the age of 4 to 10, and then 10, the situation changes. We do see growth increase, but they never get to their average height. So this is what we call psychosocial dwarfism, okay? And the result here is from neglect, abuse, or severe stress in childhood.